So, Charles, thank you for joining in on this conversation. The future is calling us to greatness.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
So, you and I share a lot of friends, but I think this is the first time that we've interacted. So, I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. And what I often do at the start is just invite my guests to share with the audience, people who are watching or listening to this who may not be familiar with your work, what you're known for, and sort of how you got to be where you are now. So if you'd be willing to share some of your story and also, don't be bashful. Like, what are you best known for? What's your contribution to this whole movement?
Well, I guess I'm probably best known for my books, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible is one. Sacred Economics is another one. Um, I'm not really sure what I'm known for or even how well I'm known. Uh, Here I am, in front of my computer, uh, but I guess I'll say a bit about how I came to do this work. Um, just how far back should I go?
Well, I mean, where you regularly pop up in my world is whenever the conversation around sustainability or how we move into a just and healthy future comes to sort of the practical economic side of things.
Right.
Invariably, people invoke you and say, "Wow, you gotta bring Charles into this conversation," or "Wow, I just read his," or whatever. So clearly, at least in the circles that I travel, that's where your work is just deeply appreciated and what you bring to that. So anything, basically.
Yeah.
Anything that you'd be willing to share in terms of, and you can actually go back. Some of my guests have actually taken a good 10 minutes or more, just sharing their story, how they got to where they
Mhm.
are. So
Yeah.
there's no wrong way to do it. Whatever way you feel
Yeah.
led to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go back a ways, maybe to being a teenager and having a sense that there's a great wrongness in the world. Not really sure what it is.
Mhm.
I mean, even going back to childhood and having this kind of um, inarticulate feeling that, it's not supposed to be this way. I'm not supposed to hate Monday and look forward to weekends. And I didn't have an intellectual context for this feeling, but I developed one in my teenage years as I started to read radical literature that confirmed my feeling of a wrongness. Ultimately, I became dissatisfied with the culprits that the radical literature identified, which could be capitalism or some other ideology or human greed, something bad in human nature. So I dug deeper uh, and came to understand our the situation of our civilization as a crisis that is arising from a mythology or a story that has developed over thousands of years that I call separation. That is embodied in all of our systems: money system, healthcare, politics, technology, education. Everything is in one way or another an expression of this deep vein of separation that says essentially who you are is a separate being in a world of other, humanity separate from nature, um, living in a universe that is just kind of out there, doesn't have the qualities of a self, doesn't have beingness, purpose, intention, that kind of thing. So we're kind of alone in the universe, and this is and things change in the world when a force is exerted on a mass. And the forces of nature are completely impersonal, indifferent to human well-being. Therefore, human well-being, whether on a personal level or a collective level, comes through control, through insulating ourselves from these indifferent forces and hostile competitors out there. And so we've built a civilization on that. And our destiny, we conceived in this story, our destiny is to someday achieve perfect control. The technological transcendence of nature, or in your own life, something like financial security, where you don't depend on the good fortune or charity of anybody else. You can take care of yourself. So that's so. Um, my economics writing has to do with first kind of identifying how our economic system embodies this myth, this story, how it separates us, how it destroys community, and how it drives endless growth,
Mm-hmm.
which is and the expansion of the realm of property and money.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then I observe that this money system is in uh, a deep and irremediable crisis that we can only postpone and worsen by postponing it. Um, and that this money crisis parallels uh, the other crises that are converging upon us.
Mm-hmm.
So then I say, okay, this breakdown is like a birth crisis, pushing us into first a space between stories, a space of not knowing anymore the answers, and then into a new and ancient story that you could call interbeing or reunion.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, okay, well, what would a money system look like that embodied the new story?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the underlying theme of my economics work. So what would a money system look like that encouraged the healing of nature and the participation in ecology, not the um, you know denial of ecology? What would a money system look like that brought human beings together
Mm-hmm.
rather than tearing them apart? So that yeah, that's where I'm coming from on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. One of the things that I've been aware of for some time, and you just touched on it, is that we share an appreciation for people like Thomas Berry and Brian Swim, and this articulation of a both ancient and new cosmology, an ancient and new narrative that helps us to live in a more intimate I-thou relationship with reality.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you could share just a little bit in terms of how you see that story. What elements from the past do you see coming into the future, and what elements do you see science providing that perhaps no ancient culture had in the way that we do today?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the what you could call new paradigms in science are um, they're another aspect of our transition into a story of interbeing in which we're no longer alone in the universe, or in which the qualities of a self no longer inhere in human beings alone. Um, for example, the tendency toward organization, which is um, in the past could only be understood as kind of this magical teleological principle, but that now through systems theory and nonlinear dynamics, we're starting to understand that this um, emergence is a property of matter,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
and not something that we have to impose upon matter.
Mm-hmm.
So and quantum mechanics would be another example. It's not exactly a new paradigm, but it's something we still haven't wrapped our minds around. We still very much when we talk about what's real, does like does I don't know, say, did the World Trade Center, was that you know masterminded by jihadi terrorists, or was that a secret plan of some part of the U.S. government? Right? Like people can debate about this, but they agree on one thing, that there's an objective fact of the matter that doesn't depend on our perceptions of it. And that's just like a basic understanding of reality that we take for granted, that it exists outside of us. And I'm not going to go too deep into the philosophy of, intersubjectivity and, um, you know, idealism and all these kind of, philosophical things. But what I'll say is that the idea that if something exists, it occupies a point in space-time, x comma y comma z at time t, like that doesn't make sense in quantum mechanics. It that only happens when you take a measurement and come into relationship with that field of potential. So in every field in science, there are kind of, it's either new paradigms or paradigms that haven't been accepted yet that are emerging that um, that in my mind, they suggest that our basic mythology, our basic ontology that we've lived with for thousands of years is wrong. And some of them are rejected by the scientific establishment. So, for example, something like Rupert Sheldrake's ideas, like morphic resonance, that says that a change that happens in one place induces a field of change, making it happen in other places, whether or not you can identify a causal mechanism. And that's not to say that the causal mechanisms don't exist and aren't important, but it's to say that they're not primary. So instead of saying the change happened somewhere else because so-and-so heard the story and decided to try it themselves, okay, that's a causal mechanism. And it's saying that whether it's that causal mechanism or some other one, that it was going to happen. So what's primary is the morphic field. So it's kind of a reversal. Rather than what's primary is the causal mechanisms. And so therefore, Michael, if you don't, make sure that lots of people find out about your good deed, your act of compassion and care, your time spent taking care of a dying loved one, then it's not going to really change the world very much. You have to broadcast it. That's kind of the old story that has an assumption essentially of force-based causality. But in the new story, what I'm calling the new story, but it's also an ancient story, we know that anything that we do has cosmic influences. Any act has cosmic significance.
Sure.
And I think that, so even when I'm talking about economics or politics, there's an understanding that the transition that we're going through, or you could even say the revolution that we're amidst, has to go down to that level.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the way that when you were just talking about quantum mechanics and some of the things at that scale, one of the things that I've sometimes cautioned people in doing, especially people who had seen the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, is that there's often a conflation or a collapsing of scale. So what is true at one scale of reality doesn't necessarily follow that that is true in the same way at a different scale. For example, at the subatomic scale, yes, you can't say with any precision that the particle is there or there or there. But at the basketball scale, the basketball is either there or there or there. And so I feel a little bit cautious, or for at least myself, a little bit reluctant to say that the World Trade Tower, I sort of agree with sort of commonplace reality that the Trade Tower, went down. So I guess personally I'm a little uncomfortable of sort of making what's true at the quantum level, sort of using that in not just a metaphorical way, but in sort of like, well, that's also true at this level. And I'm not necessarily saying that, but somebody could hearing you sort of think that.
Yeah. I'm usually pretty careful to say, that I'm not claiming that quantum superposition of states proves that the basketball was both here and there, and that it therefore depends on what you believe about it, and
Sure.
like all that kind of new age stuff. But what I say is that it offers a different source of metaphor and intuition.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can no longer say, well, at bottom reality is just like that. Now, I think that we're still going through all kinds of kind of intellectual calisthenics to incorporate quantum mechanics into our worldview. One way to do it is to simply relegate quantum phenomena to the micro level and say that on the macro scale, all of these effects cancel out. Schrodinger was basically saying that's not good enough. He said, sorry, but we can easily construct a device that magnifies the quantum and brings it into the macro level. That's really what the point of the Schrodinger cat experiment was. And now there are people who speculate, I would have to call it speculation, but grounded, scientists who are speculating that that this kind of magnification or utilization of quantum effects happens routinely in biological systems.
Yeah.
Roger Penrose thinks that. John Joe McFadden thinks that. So like, I don't know where it's all going to lead.
Yeah.
But I do think that this kind of crack in the base of our understanding of reality is significant.
Yeah. Well, coming back to the practical area that you really have contributed so much on and are focused on, can you outline, or would you be willing to outline, sort of just the contours of a what you call sacred economics? What are some of the contours of a steady state way of doing economy, way of doing economics that is more nourishing of individual and community well being?
Mm. Yeah, so two things have to happen. One is that the realm of money has to shrink, and we have to start doing things um, without money that we used to do with money. Um, Now, I'm not someone who thinks that we need to abolish money or that money is a bad thing. So the second thing that needs to happen is that, in addition to shrinking the money realm, is to change the nature of money. And that's mostly what the book is about, although these two things are linked because the design of money today, not that anyone consciously designed it, but the way that money works today um, uh, only only works in the context of growth.
Right.
So you know, contrary to shrinking the money realm, I mean, what happens is that it inexorably grows,
Yeah.
and that happens. The reason for that is essentially the way that money is created as interest-bearing debt. There's always more debt than there is money. So in order to keep pace with the growth of that, the money economy has to expand too. And I could go into a lot more detail about that.
Yeah.
I do it in the book.
Yeah.
So part of the picture of a regenerative economy or a sacred economy would be to change the way that money is created. And so my proposal that I've drawn on various thinkers to develop is essentially to have negative interest built into the system through a liquidity tax on bank reserves, which is actually very, very simple to implement.
Mm.
In fact, the ECB already has like a very, very tiny one now. The Bank of Japan has done it before. The Riksbank of Sweden has done it, like just a negative fraction of a percent. And again, I can go into the details of that more if you're interested, but that's just one piece
Yeah.
of it. And it allows the economy to work for credit to flow in the absence of growth.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you're onto
Today,
something. I think that line, and I may want you to go more into that because I think that ever since 1988, I was pastoring my first church in Western Massachusetts, little church in Granville. It was the only church in a town of 1,500 people. So I married, buried, and baptized everybody who wanted. I was the town parson in the old New England sense. And one of my parishioners, it was this amazing, still alive, this amazing geek who was very widely read. And he gave me a copy of probably in 1990 or 1989, Margaret Kennedy's Interest in Inflation-Free Money, I think it was. And that was the first time I had ever been exposed to a radical different thinking on the nature of money and interest and that sort of thing and growth. And of course, since then, I've read some other things. But in this interview series, one of the people I interviewed early on was Richard Heinberg. And his book, The End of Growth, really was the introduction. I mean, that book, I had read a number of his books on peak oil over the years, but that book opened me up to somebody I had never heard before, John Michael Greer, who's now become my favorite author. I've read like 8 of his books. But your work in terms of rethinking how do we do economics in a world where growth itself has become pathological. Growth itself is leading us to have a detrimental impact. And so, our way of doing economics is really relatively recent in terms of the scale and the way that we've done it. And so having a way that doesn't cause us to rape the earth, to extract the wealth of the planet and guarantee that future generations are going to suffer. I mean, everything that we're doing economically is so unsustainable. So yeah, feel free to lean more into some of the problems that you see of the current system, and especially any sort of outlining a path through.
Yeah. Well, like you said, growth has become pathological. And so we're caught in a bind on the one hand, growth is pathological. On the other hand, the system stops working if there isn't growth. If there's
Exactly.
no growth, then there are no lending opportunities, credit stops flowing, unemployment grows, concentration of wealth intensifies. I mean, everything that we're seeing today uh, happens, and all of these problems would go away if economic growth could return to the fast rates that it enjoyed in the 50s and 60s. And politicians kind of know this. That's why left, right, and center, they're all like, how do we, restart economic growth?
Right.
And at the same time, understanding that what does economic growth mean? It means turning more of the oceans into a catch, more of of oil in the ground into gasoline, more of forests into board feet. And less well understood is that it also means turning more and more human relationships into commoditized services,
Yes.
which explains the uh, disintegration of community. Because community basically means people doing things for each other without getting paid for it.
Right.
My neighbor will help me fix my roof. That's community. Now I'm paying a roofer to do it. The neighborhood watches out for the kids. Now we send them all off to daycare. So, we used to cook food for ourselves and each other. Now we buy it at the supermarket deli. So whether it's the ecological fabric or the social fabric, growth is destroying it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're caught in a bind, and politicians and kind of liberal-leaning even economists, they'll talk about, well, sustainable growth. Let's have green growth, but it doesn't address the fundamental problem, which is that there is a limit to the amount of nature that can be converted into product,
Exactly.
and the amount of human relationships that can be converted into services. So, you could have growth in photovoltaics, but unless that is displacing fossil fuel combustion, you're not going to help the situation. And so far, that's what's happened.
Yeah.
We have a growing percentage of renewables in the energy mix, but we're not burning less fossil fuels.
Exactly. Exactly.
So the end of growth argument there are some, tricky details to it. We could talk about, ephemeralization, miniaturization, and all these things. So it takes a bit of work to really establish the
Sure.
case.
Sure.
But yeah, my economic thinking really is, how could a zero growth or degrowth system work that doesn't have unemployment, concentration of wealth, and so on?
Yeah. Well, is there anything that, I mean, because there are going to be quite a few people, probably the vast majority, who are watching this series or listening to this series on their iPods, who get that
Right.
growth is a huge problem. So, if you could share just a little bit in terms of what would a degrowth or a steady state system look like, feel like, sound like?
Yeah.
And then obviously, if they want more information, they go to your book and other resources as well. But sort of give us a sense, a taste at least of something in that direction.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll mention a couple things. One is the liquidity fee, negative interest. So if you're a bank and you have, say, $10 billion in excess reserves parked at the Fed, today there's no penalty for that, and you can invest them in a risk-free investment, which is maybe a treasury bond, or if you have enough money, it's anything, because you'll get bailed out.
Yep.
So, why would you lend it to people who are actually going to spend it when you can just keep it risk-free?
Right.
So, well, what if your $10 billion were subject to a 5% fee to keep it at the Fed? Then in a year, it's only going to be worth $9.5 billion. So it's now to your advantage to lend it out at zero interest, which means that you can lend it to something that isn't going to bring a high return. Which
Yeah.
means that, essentially, I'm skipping some details here, but it means that credit can flow in the absence of growth.
Yes. Yeah. That's great.
So that's a key piece, and it also it makes money like everything else in the universe. It decays,
Right. Exactly.
it cycles, it doesn't, it's not preserved, growing endlessly,
Yes.
linearly or exponentially. So it's no longer an exception to the law of return.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so another proposal that I've become since I wrote Sacred Economics, I've become even more enthusiastic about is a universal basic income,
Hmm.
which Switzerland is now considering through a citizens initiative. And basically, it is kind of an annual stipend paid to everybody that's enough to meet basic living
Yeah.
expenses. Now, a conventional economist would say this would be a disaster because you would no longer have an incentive to work. But really, underneath that is an assumption about human nature
Mm.
that says, Michael, you don't really want to work. You're just doing this because you have to, because you know that if you don't, then you're going to suffer scarcity. You're going to suffer hardship. Because I know you. You're fundamentally self-interested. That's who you are because you're a separate self in a world of other, and more for you is less for me. We're all in competition. And if you had your druthers, you wouldn't be doing this show. You'd be sitting on the couch eating chocolate bonbons and playing World of Warcraft. But fortunately, we have this scarcity-based money system that forces you to work and forces people to, push the mops and drive the garbage trucks and do the menial tasks that run society. I think that this view of human nature is backward.
Yeah.
I think that people have a natural desire to contribute to something greater than themselves,
Exactly.
that they carry a gift. Because I see so many people choosing life paths that offer no financial security and working really, really hard at it.
Yeah.
Now it's true that that people would be less willing to do degrading, dangerous, oppressive work. So there would be then a design incentive in the economy to minimize that kind of labor.
Yeah.
Probably people would have to make less garbage. Probably people would have to clean their own toilets more. We'd have to have a system that would minimize degradation and tedium. And so, it would be a huge change. And there are lots of other ways to look at it, but it all comes down to a different understanding of human nature, of who we are. Are we competing individuals in a world of other, or are we interrelated, interconnected, interexistent beings
Yeah.
for whom more for you is actually more for me?
Yeah.
That's ecology. Scientists used to think that if we eliminated the harmful species, the rest would be better off. But now we know that you eliminate any species and the whole system is weaker
Yeah.
because each has a gift to give to the whole.
Yeah.
That's an ecological understanding. And I think that to have a truly sustainable economy, we have to bring that ecological mindset into our economic thinking.
Yeah. Amen. Well, I mean, I speak, I don't know how much you know about the work that my wife and I do, but we travel all over North America. We've spoken to about 2,000 groups in the last 12 years. Basically, where science, inspiration, and sustainability intersect is what we're passionate about. And I often say that ecology is the new theology. And in that way, also, ecology needs to be at the heart of the new economics. That is our best scientific understanding of the relationship and the what you call interbeing, what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing, but this interrelationship of beings in a community and playing to each other's strengths. I mean, you were talking before about sort of a baseline income. I remember back 22 years ago, I think, something like that. I was on the board of the North American Conference on Christianity and Ecology. And Bob Schutz was also on that. He wrote a book called The $30,000 Solution. And basically, suggesting a whole paradigm, a way of thinking about economics where there was a basic income. Everybody got $30,000. And I remember at that time thinking that was brilliant and really hadn't heard much along those lines in a couple decades. So I'm delighted to hear that this is something that you also have a lot of enthusiasm for.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, Charles, you've got, 4 boys, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you stay inspired in the face of some really scary stuff in terms of economics, in terms of politics, some of the insanity where we are, where basically money is running the show? peak oil, climate change. I mean, the growing gap between the rich and the
Yeah.
poor. There's some really, really scary stuff. And clearly you stay inspired to be in action, participating in what my mentor Thomas Berry called the great work. So how do you do that? Like, what do you think
Yeah.
of? What allows you to stay inspired to be in action?
I guess there's three things. One is that I have an understanding of the dynamics of transition, where the old pattern has to kind of fulfill all of its variations and reach an extreme. As that happens, though, it begins to hollow out. So we have, the superstructures of our society are stronger than ever. The surveillance state, the military-industrial complex, all of that stuff. But underneath it, there's this kind of void, this cynicism, this lack of fervent ideological commitment to it. Things that, like even something like patriotism in America, it's become kind of this brand that isn't, for most people, as like kind of deeply unquestionable as it was when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It's a lot like, I like to compare it with the Soviet Union, where, in the 50s and 60s, the elites of that country fervently, authentically believed in the superiority of their system. Khrushchev said, "We will bury you." And it wasn't bravado. It was obvious. Our system is superior. By the 80s, the structures of the Soviet state were still in place, but none of the elites really believed in Marxism anymore. The core had hollowed out, leaving just a shell, which disintegrated with a little tap. I think the same thing is happening now to our whole civilization. We just don't believe as fervently anymore in the project of civilization. For example, in the conquest of nature, in the coming technological utopia. We don't really take for granted now that we're on the right track, moving forward into this golden future.
Yeah.
So the core is hollowing out. That's one reason I'm optimistic. Another reason is that the kind of logic of despair draws on some of the same assumptions, the same worldview that our ecocidal system draws on.
Say more.
So our system is based on our separation from nature and our separation as individuals from the world outside of ourselves. From that viewpoint, your power to create change depends really on the amount of force that you can exert or that you can marshal to your cause. Because you're just one little person, that means that you can't really do very much. Besides, the powers that be have a lot more force at their disposal than you do. However, okay, so you see how that helplessness comes from kind of the same story of self
Sure.
that underlies our civilization. Okay, so in my life, I've had experiences that show me that our force-based understanding of causality is incomplete. Experiences of synchronicity, of things that I can only call miracles, which doesn't invoke a supernatural external agency. A miracle is something that's possible from a new story, but not from an old.
Oh, that's a fun. I like that. I'll steal that, but I'll give you credit.
Yeah,
I
go
like
for
that.
it. Yeah. So a miracle is an invitation. It says, reality as you knew it is just a small part of what's real. What you thought of as possible, practical, and real is much too narrow. It's an invitation. It's an invitation that I've received repeatedly and just, by small steps have dared to stand in a little bit more firmly. Because still I'm like you, I'm living amidst the structures, the ideologies, and the internalized habits of separation. So this is a long journey to really act from what I know on some level deep down, and what everybody knows, which is, as I said before, that every act has cosmic significance. So I imagine, like, what would be possible if everybody understood and could stand in the technology of being at the right place at the right time, of having just the right resource come in just when you need it.
Hmm.
That kind of super effectiveness that isn't something that you can uh, contrive.
Hmm.
Uh, but you've had these experiences, I'm sure,
Oh
you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So those kinds of experiences, they give me an unreasonable hope, uh, because I know that the world doesn't work the way that my despair tells me it does.
mm,
The third reason I'm optimistic is that I meet young people who are already standing in that,
mm,
who are like born into what took me 20 or 30 years
yeah,
to imperfectly arrive at.
hmm,
And I'm like, wow,
yeah,
what are they going to be doing when they're in their 40s?
yeah,
You know, um, I'll just, I'll meet one of them, and not just young people, but especially young people. I'll meet
sure.
one of them, and I'll hear their story, and I'll be looking at them, and I'll be like, how could I be pessimistic knowing that you exist?
That's
It's
true.
really
Yeah,
human beings
yeah,
that it's not that I've worked out some plan
hmm,
that I can, say, if only everybody would agree to my plan and see things my way, then the world would make it. And if they don't, then we're screwed. No, it's like it's kind of um, transrational. It's I guess you could say that I'm in a way held in my optimism and positivity by the people and events that have come into my awareness.
yeah, yeah. That's great. The last piece, the third part of what helps you have optimism or hope or inspiration, it leads me to want to ask a question that Connie and I were talking about just this morning and also yesterday. I was doing a church service and she asked this young woman. I was at a retreat center. We're in Iowa right now. One of the things we're doing this year is we're speaking along the route of the Great March for Climate Action. So we've got about 100 speaking engagements lined up between LA and DC over an 8.5 month period. And right now we're smack in the middle of it in Iowa. And so I spoke at a Catholic a Franciscan retreat center called Prairie Woods, just outside of Cedar Rapids a few days ago. And Connie was in a conversation with a young woman who's in her young 20s. And, one of the things that I would like to ask you is a question that Connie asked her, speaking as a young person. How do you, like, how do you advise, or how would you advise a young person who's trying to seek out, like, what to do as a career? I mean, we're in such transition times where the old system is clearly dysfunctional. So many people want to do good work that they really feel is benefiting the future, and yet there's not as many opportunities as there are people who really would love to do that. So
Mhm.
how would you coach or advise or counsel a young person who's sort of trying to feel out which direction to go in terms of their own career or their own work path?
What I usually say, um, first and foremost, is that your secret knowledge is true, that you are not here to make a living.
You're not
Uh,
here to what?
to make a
Oh
living,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that you carry a gift and a magnificent potential that is important for the world. And that the most important thing that you can do is to find out what that is, develop it, and give it forward,
Yeah.
which
Amen.
is the opposite of what a guidance counselor tells you in high school. Oh, you're good at art. Well, you could go into graphic design. You could go into advertising. Here's how to get money with your gift. And I'm not saying to not get money, but what I'm saying is that what is first is the gift, and the return um, is secondary.
Yeah.
It'll happen, and it's important, but it's not the focus of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
How to survive is not the focus of your life.
Yeah.
And again, that draws on this deeper story. Part of the story of separation is that the purpose of life is to survive, that our genes program us to maximize reproductive self-interest, and that nature is a war of each against all, a bunch of separate selves in competition with each other. And again, that's a paradigm that's shifting as our understanding of symbiosis and um, genetic merging and stuff grows. But anyway, so yeah, to a young person, I validate that knowledge, and I'll say, if you can really bring that in and trust it, it will be your compass. you'll know what to do.
Yeah.
You'll know how to navigate these admittedly very tricky waters because we don't have an economic system that rewards the kinds of things that people want to give to now. And that's different than 50 years ago. 50
Yeah.
years ago, the project of civilization was still robust, and an idealistic young person wanted to be an atomic scientist, or an astronaut or something like that, and contribute to the story that was still hale and hearty. But now, the really bright, idealistic young people, they don't want to do that. They want to go into permaculture. They want to go into restorative justice or something like that.
Exactly.
And the structures, the institutions don't support that.
Yeah.
So it is like I don't want to trivialize the difficulty of this path. We're kind of pioneering a new world, but there are deeper principles at work that ensure that somehow you'll be taken care of.
Yeah.
Not as
Well,
100% guarantee.
right.
Yeah.
Well, especially as you attend to the wealth that is currently not measured as wealth, which is quality relationships with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors, with your community. Um, uh, that wealth, I mean, this is one of those areas, as I was reading your bio on your website, one of the things I resonated very deeply with is this place where Connie and I are now. I mean, for 12 years, we've been effectively homeless. We don't have a home. We don't have an apartment. We don't have any place we cycle back to, that
Yeah.
we own or anything else. And yet we have a wealth of tribe, of community, of friends and family, friends that have become family, that we feel like we're the richest people in the world, that we get to do this work at this amazing time in history and do it with each other. We love doing it. She's an acclaimed science writer. We're both sort of at the top of our game in terms of what we do and how we do it, and the sort of way we're received. And yet, so monetarily, we wouldn't be considered wealthy at all. And yet, from a subjective, emotional, and mission stance and community stance, we feel like we're the richest people on the planet. In fact, we often remind
Right.
ourselves that we're richer than kings.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I mean, young people. My daughter, I mean, I've got 3 kids. My 31-year-old daughter, she's in the Marine Corps. She's married to someone who's also career military. My son is an athletic trainer, 29, in San Diego, and my youngest daughter is 24. She is a peace and justice and sustainability activist. She is into permaculture and organic gardening and massage and restorative justice
Right.
and try the gifting economy, finding another way to do this. And one of the exercises that I've used now with audiences for a long time, I don't use it every time, but I often do. I talk about, create a piece of paper and line down the middle, so you've got 2 columns. And on one side, list all the activities, the projects, the things that you love to do that light you up, that give you joy, that give you a sense of energy and fulfillment and happiness, things you're good at, things other people tell you that you're good at, etc. Like, where's the juice? Where's the joy? And list all that. And at the top of that, you put my great joy. And on the other side, list all the things that you're aware of in your community or in the world where you feel the world's needs. Not just where you intellectually know about what's needed, but where does it hit you? Where do you feel it? Where do you get upset or frustrated? And especially where do you feel compassion? Where does your heart just break open with something that's happening in your community or in the world? And you list all that. And at the top of that list, you put the world's great needs or my community's great needs as I feel them. So you've got 2 lists, my great joy and the world's great needs. And then I basically just invite them to just pay attention to their heart. They don't even have to call it prayer or meditation if they don't want to. They just pay attention to this part of your body. There's wisdom when we're guided from the center of our chest in terms of where are the intersections, like where are the places where your great joy and the world's great needs intersect. And you may or may not be able to make much money at that at this time, but it will give you such joy and fulfillment. It's like Joseph Campbell talked about follow your bliss. Well, this is follow your bliss bless. It's follow your bliss that's also, simultaneously a blessing to others in the process. And it sort of gets at some of what you were just pointing at as well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds, I would endorse that.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm always aware of is that, and you talk about it in terms of interbeing and this whole new story, and I completely agree, is that, we are not isolated individuals. We are each shaped by our environment. We're shaped by our social environment. We're influenced by that as well as we influence. And I'm curious, I haven't remembered to ask this question of all my guests, but I sometimes do, and it's always, I get a great response. You know, who have been some of your most significant mentors and teachers on this path? And who would you count as sort of your closest colleagues and those who like most deeply align with your sense of mission and purpose at this time in your life?
Okay, yeah. I've been asked similar questions before, and honestly, the people who had the biggest impact on me are not people who are well known.
Sure.
Um, my motorcycle mechanic when I was living in Taiwan. Uh, um,
See, this is more inspiring than just big name people, because what
yeah,
that lets people know is that anybody can make a difference that then can ripple out in ways that are far larger than they would have had any idea.
yeah.
So
Not only was
say more about your mechanic.
not only was he a fantastically skilled mechanic, but he hired people who were out of prison, out of jail and stuff like that, and just like held so much love in that little motorcycle shop uh, that these guys who probably would have ended up going back to prison um, ended up being able to lead normal lives.
Mm-hmm.
The logic of separation says that his impact on our world is much less than somebody doing big public things like me. But interacting with people like that, and there's many others who have impacted me, a preschool teacher, a man, and he would just like kneel down, look the kids in the eye, and talk to them with respect.
Mm-hmm.
A woman who spent 10 years of her life taking care of her demented mother. Like people who are doing those things invisibly, they inspire me because they don't have the assist of at least a subculture of people telling them how great a thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
They're not getting validated. They're not even getting money for that kind of work usually,
Mm-hmm.
but they're doing it anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and they're kind of holding the field that more ordinary people like myself can step into.
Yeah.
People who need that affirmation maybe. So yeah, honestly, it's like sometimes I think that the great souls have kind of stepped back, and they're occupying these humble positions. The dedication of my new book is something like that, to the humble.
Wow.
Um, and you asked another part of that question.
The other one were who are some of the people that you feel as your closest colleagues and
Yeah,
sort of your intellectual or mission tribe, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Like I don't necessarily have extensive interactions with these people, but there'll be just like a moment of connection. Um, it's almost telepathic. Uh, and I keep wondering, are we meant to collaborate more directly somehow?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we just kind of all swimming in the same field and helping each other
Mm-hmm.
through invisible paths? Uh, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'm going to name them.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'll go ahead and answer the same question myself, just because I'm noticing that if I ask a question, I probably should be willing to respond to the same kind of question. I think well, first of all, what you said touched my heart deeply, which is there have been people that are not well known at all. It just, they were in my life, and yet they played a profound role. In fact, one of them was my second grade teacher, Mrs. Ottman, at a little Catholic school, grade school. And I, back 6 or 7 years ago, when I was writing my book, Thank God for Evolution, chapter 11, I have exercises, practical exercises, of how to live just a thriving life. And one of them was expressing gratitude to the people in your life who have made a difference that you've never actually taken the time to express gratitude to. And so I had made a list, and one of them was Mrs. Ottman. And so I just, the next time I was visiting my father in Poughkeepsie, New York area, I went by this school. I haven't been to that school in 46 years, no, 43 years, something like that. In a long time. And it so happened that Mrs. Ottman was actually retiring that week. I was visiting her.
Wow.
I was visiting on Wednesday, and on Friday she was retiring.
Wow.
And so for me to be able to share just just eye to eye, and just tell her what a difference her example more than anything else was in my life, and that so much of the good that I've then been able to do, and I gave her a copy of my book and whatever, quite well wouldn't have happened had it not been for people like her in my life. It was just a deeply emotional moment for both of us. So I too have those people in my life, but my main mentors I think would be Thomas Berry, Brian Swim. Although Brian's been sort of more an older brother than a mentor as such, but Thomas Berry, Joanna Macy, Shirley. Dolores LaChapelle, a deep ecologist, and sort of some of my closest colleagues now, I think, are Tom Atlee, Peggy Holman, David Sloan Wilson, the evolutionist, Joel Primick and Nancy Ellen Abrams, their view, the view from the center of the universe. Sort of people, Jonathan Haidt. These are people who really have a strong grounding in our best scientific understanding of reality, and yet are deeply committed to the practical side of that in helping us live more fruitful lives, more abundant lives, more joyous lives, and applying that knowledge to help us have a sacred relationship to reality, whether you use secular or religious names for reality, in such a way, as I shared before, that moves all of us forward in some kind of a healthy way.
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions, in fact, this is the sort of off-the-wall question that I purposely never let my guests know about ahead of time, and that is that if you could have dinner, or let's say either one of two things, either a dinner party where you invite any three people in human history to join you for dinner, so all four of you are at dinner together, or a one-on-one, over a beer or a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or a meal, so either a dinner party or one-on-one, who would the three people in history that you would love to have that experience, and why would you choose them?
Well, that's a tough one. I'm thinking about how much of these historical personas is our kind of projection of our from our own context of psychological qualities that we admire and stuff. So already I'm going into like these metaphysical questions of who is this historical personage. Maybe I shouldn't distract myself with that. Maybe this is just a delaying tactic while I think of somebody.
Actually, I'll give you a few minutes because, I realize that the most common response when I've asked this, and I've asked this about, 30 some odd times now, is the person says, "Oh gosh, I'd have to give that more thought," So we all, or I'll wake up tomorrow morning and realize, "Oh, I should have said this," or whatever. So,
yeah. One person that's coming to mind, now the name's slipping my mind, well-known African-American abolitionist, intellectual, Civil War era.
Oh gosh, I think I know who you're talking about, and I'm also blanking on his name.
Like the number one guy.
Yeah, no, exactly. Oh gosh,
I'm just totally blanking.
Maybe 3 months ago, I was in a conversation about him. Okay. Well, in any case, anyway, I think you and I probably have the same guy in mind, and so let's go on to the other two.
I'm thinking like it'd be interesting to have a one-on-one with one of history's villains. With maybe Adolf Hitler or somebody like that.
Yeah.
Like maybe if I could go back in time and have a conversation with him in 1920 or something like that. Maybe I could bring some kind of input that would have caused him to choose a different path.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're actually the second person who has suggested, for very different reasons, but sort of one of these brilliant people who were on the sort of shadow side of history and did great damage, and yet they clearly were brilliant people.
Yeah, I'm thinking one of these people who are like like so far ahead of their time that they were just disparaged and pilloried. Um,
Yes. Oh gosh, yes. Wow,
yeah,
that's oh yeah.
I, I
Okay.
just I just read about a woman. I don't remember her name, but she wrote like the first, um, at least in her historical context, the first sex manual,
Uh-huh.
for married couples, and it was written in very discreet language,
Yeah.
but it basically gave sex advice to the
Yeah.
husband, and she was taken to court, um, and and um, charged with all kinds of crimes and committed suicide.
Ah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So I think I'd have to like really get quiet and think about
Yeah, no that
exactly who, but that's the kind of person who I would like to say, hey, I'm from the future. Thank you for what you did.
yes, exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
you're even if you never knew it, uh, your work is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, I love that. And well, Charles, this has been great. Anything that you sort of like to say in winding down on this subject that the past is rooting for us and the future is calling us to greatness? And then how can people go? Where would you advise people go to learn more about your work or go more deeply into it?
Um, well, I mean, people can go to my website, charleseisenstein.net, and that has links to everything, all my other work. Um, and I guess maybe my parting words would be um, pretty much the same thing I'd say to the young people that you asked me earlier,
Mm.
uh, that we have this innate knowledge of our of our magnificence as bearers of gifts, and an innate knowledge that a more beautiful world is possible. Possible not just in the sense of, well, maybe it could happen if everybody gets it,
Hmm.
but possible in the sense that we have creative agency
Hmm.
over it in some paradoxical way where it doesn't matter what other people decide. Like our actions are significant. To trust that knowledge that what I do is important because that knowledge has been denied, suppressed, and betrayed a lot. So in a lot of us, it's kind of this shrunken thing or this ember
Hmm.
that needs a bit of support so that we can dare believe it.
Hmm.
And I guess um, we can help each other believe it and help each other um, do the stuff that other part of our mind that says it's irrational, it's naive, it's impractical, it'll never work. Like pretty much anything really worth doing in this world is impractical,
Yes.
and so ironically enough, it's the naive person who's actually more practical, the person who tries something that he's been told is impossible.
Mm.
Things are always going to be this way. They're never going to really change, like that kind of cynicism. Uh, so I guess I would encourage you to be naive
Yeah. Well,
a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've never heard it phrased quite like that, but I love it. It certainly resonates with my own heart on that matter. So, yeah. Well, Charles, thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this conversation series and just blessings on your work and your family. And yeah, I look forward to crossing paths at some point and
Yeah.
just
Yeah. This was
meeting in
fun.
person. Yeah,
Yeah. This was fun. I enjoyed it too.
cool. Great.
Yeah.
All right, take care.
All right.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.